Welcome to The Explainer. We're going to break down a massive shift in U.S. trade policy. I mean, this thing happened practically overnight and sent huge waves through the global economy. So let's just jump right in.
So picture this, right? You're an analyst. You're tracking the markets. One day, the U.S. has this huge tariff structure in place. The very next day, poof, the Supreme Court says a giant chunk of it is illegal. So how on earth does a cornerstone of economic policy just evaporate in 24 hours?
Well, the answer is kind of buried in the legal plumbing of U.S. trade law. And look, if you really want to get a handle on the volatility this caused and, the opportunities it created, you've got to understand the two very different legal tools at the center of this whole story.
Okay, so let's start with the first tool. This was the one that gave the administration these huge, sweeping powers to slap on tariffs. And, well, it turned out to be a power that went just a little too far. So this is IEEPA. Now, for you analysts out there, you can think of this as a really powerful, super flexible tool. It was meant for real national security crises, the kind of thing that lets a president hit another country with sanctions fast. But in 2025, it got used in a totally new way to put these broad, reciprocal tariffs on pretty much everything coming into the U.S. And how? By declaring a national emergency over the trade deficit. And wow, just look at the impact here. Using IEEPA this way made tariff revenue just skyrocket. We're talking a nearly 200% jump in a single year. This was no minor policy tweak, right? This was a complete overhaul of the U.S. trade landscape. It touched basically every single supply chain out there. But, when you use an emergency power for something like broad economic policy, you're gonna get some pushback. It drew a ton of legal challenges, and it all came to a head in this huge showdown at the Supreme Court.
And here's the absolute key takeaway for this whole thing. The court's decision, it wasn't about whether tariffs are a good idea or a bad idea. Nope. It was about something much more fundamental, the separation of powers. Like Morgan Stanley points out, the court basically said, look, tariffs are taxes, and the Constitution is crystal clear on this one. Only Congress has the power to tax, not the executive branch.
So that was it. On February 20th, 2026, the Supreme Court brought down the hammer. They ruled that using IEEPA this way was a major overreach of presidential power. And just like that, the entire legal foundation for a massive chunk of U.S. tariff policy, it just crumbled.
I mean, can you imagine? This one decision suddenly put over $133 billion in collected tariffs into this weird legal limbo. Was it going to be refunded? To who? The Supreme Court didn't weigh in on that. They just kicked it down to the lower courts to figure out the gigantic financial mess. Talk about creating uncertainty for businesses, and for the government, too.
So, with their most powerful tool now off the table, the administration had to pivot, and they had to do it fast if they wanted to keep their high tariff policy from completely falling apart. So what did they do? They reached for a different, much older law. And when I say fast, I mean fast. Just look at this timeline. The ruling drops on a Friday. By Saturday, just one day later, the White House is already announcing a new plan. And by Tuesday, a whole new 15% global tariff is in effect. This was not a retreat. This was a super quick redeployment, just with a different legal weapon. And that new weapon? It was Section 122 of the Trade Act of 1974. Now, this is totally different from IEEPA. It's not based on some vague national emergency. This law is specifically designed to deal with balance of payment deficits. So it's a much more traditional trade tool. But, and this is a big but, it comes with some really important strings attached. Okay, this slide right here really nails the difference, especially if you're an analyst. Think of IEEPA as a blank check. It was indefinite, super flexible, and the president didn't need to ask Congress for permission to keep it going. But Section 122, that's way more like a short-term loan. It's got a hard and fast 150-day time limit. And if you want to extend it, you absolutely have to get approval from Congress. That is a huge shift, right? We're going from pure executive power to a policy that's suddenly loaded with legislative risk.
All right, so let's get down to the bottom line. What did this big legal switcheroo actually mean for the numbers, for businesses trying to navigate all this? How did it actually change the game? This chart from Morgan Stanley lays it out perfectly. You can see the average tariff rate on imports immediately dropped, right? From about 13% down to 11%. But now look at that third bar. That is the big risk factor everyone's watching. Because if Congress doesn't step in and extend these Section 122 tariffs after 150 days, that rate could totally plummet down to the 6-7% range. We're talking about a potential tariff cliff. So what this all meant was a really mixed bag of impacts across the board. For some companies, hey, great news. Their costs for imported parts went down. But for protected domestic industries like steel and aluminum, they suddenly had a lot more foreign competition to worry about. And China, which was a huge target of the old tariffs, actually saw their potential rate get cut in half, from 30% down to 15%. And of course, the whole situation, it was a boom time for trade lawyers and financial firms who were trying to figure out the whole refund mess. So that's where things stand. The administration had to trade this powerful, permanent legal tool for a temporary one with a ticking clock. And that leaves us with the biggest question hanging over all of this. For global trade, for any of you analyzing market risk, what happens when that 150-day clock runs out? That deadline in Congress, that is the new flashpoint everyone needs to be watching.